The bank manager's denial felt like a slap across Victoria Thompson's face, the words echoing in the stuffy office as sweat beaded along her collar despite the early morning hour in Fort Bowie, Arizona. "I am terribly sorry, Miss Thompson, but without a husband's signature, this land contract is void. Territory law requires a male witness or spouse for any property transaction exceeding $200. His tone carried that particular blend of sympathy and dismissal she had come to recognize in men who saw women as perpetual children requiring guardianship, and Victoria felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling like the adobe walls of abandoned homesteads dotting the desert landscape beyond the town's borders. She had traveled 3 weeks by stagecoach from Pennsylvania, enduring dust storms, the constant threat of bandits, and the suffocating July heat of 1883 to claim the property her uncle had left her, only to discover that his will meant nothing without a man's endorsement. The irony burned bitter on her tongue. Uncle Bernard had believed in her business acumen enough to leave her his profitable cattle ranch, but the Arizona Territory government did not share his progressive views. Victoria's fingers trembled as she clutched the deed, the paper now worthless despite the official stamps, and her uncle's clear handwriting naming her sole beneficiary. "There must be something I can do," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady even as panic clawed at her chest. "I have traveled across the country. I have the funds to maintain the property. Surely there is an exception." The manager, a portly man named Henderson with sweat stains spreading across his vest, shook his head with what might have been genuine regret. "The law is quite clear, miss. You would need either a husband or a male business partner willing to witness the contract as your equal. Without that, I cannot release the property or the associated bank accounts." He paused, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Might I suggest seeking suitable marriage prospects? Fort Bowie has several respectable gentlemen who would surely be honored to assist a young woman of your obvious refinement." The suggestion made her skin crawl, not because she opposed marriage in principle, but because the idea of selling herself into matrimony simply to access her own inheritance felt like the worst kind of surrender. Victoria had watched her mother fade into background wallpaper in her father's house, her opinions dismissed, her dreams forgotten. She had promised herself something different, something more. Her uncle had understood that hunger for independence, which was precisely why his betrayal by death felt so acute now. She left the bank in a daze, stepping into the blazing Arizona sun that turned Fort Bowie's main street into a shimmering mirage. The town itself was small but bustling, built around the nearby military fort that gave it both name and protection from Apache raids that had plagued the region for decades. Wooden storefronts lined the dusty thoroughfare, their awnings providing precious strips of shade where townspeople clustered to escape the heat. Victoria could feel eyes tracking her movement. The curiosity of a small town confronted with a stranger, particularly an unaccompanied woman in a tailored green traveling dress that marked her as an Easterner as clearly as if she wore a sign. She made her way to the modest hotel where she had taken a room, her mind racing through increasingly desperate scenarios. Finding a husband in a matter of days seemed impossible, and even if she could, the idea of trusting a stranger with control over her property made her stomach turn. Male business partners were scarcely better. She had heard enough stories of women cheated out of their inheritances by unscrupulous men who exploited exactly these kinds of legal vulnerabilities. The hotel restaurant was nearly empty in the mid-morning lull, just a few stragglers finishing late breakfasts. Victoria ordered coffee she did not want and sat by the window watching Fort Bowie's residents go about their business. Cavalry soldiers in dusty blue uniforms rode past in formation. A freight wagon loaded with supplies creaked toward the general store. 2 women in sun-faded dresses gossiped on the boardwalk across the street, their laughter carrying on the hot breeze. "You look like someone just stole your horse and shot your dog," a voice drawled from behind her, and Victoria turned to find herself being addressed by a cowboy who had apparently emerged from the kitchen area. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes were working gear, worn but clean, leather chaps over denim trousers and a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking green that seemed to assess her with genuine curiosity rather than the dismissive appraisal she had endured from most men in town. "I apologize for my appearance," Victoria said stiffly, in no mood for cowboy charm or whatever this stranger intended. "I am dealing with a private matter." "Did not mean to pry," he said, but he did not move away. Instead, he gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Mind if I sit?" "I am waiting on a supply order and standing gets tiresome after you have been in the saddle since dawn." When she hesitated, he added, "Name is Ethan Marsh. I work the Double M Ranch about 10 miles south of here. Well, I own it technically, but saying I work it sounds less pretentious." Despite herself, Victoria felt a flicker of interest. A ranch owner, and one who apparently worked his own land rather than simply collecting profits. "Victoria Thompson," she replied, nodding permission for him to join her. "And I did not think ranch owners made their own supply runs." "Usually I do not," Ethan admitted, settling into the chair with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. "But my foreman broke his leg last week, and I needed to check on some equipment Henderson ordered for me at the bank. Besides, I like getting into town occasionally. Reminds me that civilization still exists beyond cattle and cactus." He studied her for a moment, his gaze direct but not aggressive. "You are new to Fort Bowie, visiting family?" "Inheriting property," Victoria corrected, then wondered why she was sharing personal information with a complete stranger. Perhaps because he seemed genuinely interested rather than condescending. Or perhaps because she was desperate enough to grasp at any potential solution, no matter how unlikely. Or rather, attempting to inherit property. "It appears the Arizona Territory has opinions about women owning land." Understanding dawned in Ethan's expression, followed by something that looked like anger on her behalf. "Let me guess. They want a husband's signature on the deed." When she nodded, he let out a low whistle of disgust. "That is a particular brand of stupid, if you will pardon my language. My mother ran our family ranch for 5 years after my father died, and she did a better job than he ever managed. But she had to fight that same nonsense, getting male cousins to sign papers for land she owned outright." The validation eased something tight in Victoria's chest. "Your mother sounds like a formidable woman." "She was," Ethan agreed, and the past tense carried a weight of grief that suggested the loss was still relatively fresh. "Died 2 years ago. Pneumonia took her quick." He shook himself slightly as if pushing away the sadness. "But we are not talking about me. What is your situation? Maybe I can help. I know most folks around here, including which lawyers are not complete charlatans." Victoria found herself explaining the entire frustrating situation, the words pouring out in a rush that surprised her. She told him about Uncle Bernard, about the ranch she was supposed to inherit, about the bank manager's ultimatum and his suggestion that she simply marry to solve the problem. Ethan listened without interrupting, his attention absolute in a way that made her feel heard rather than merely tolerated. "The Twin Creek Ranch," he said when she finished, recognition lighting his features. "I knew Bernard Thompson. Good man, ran a solid operation. About 2,000 acres of decent grazing land and a reliable water source, which is worth its weight in gold out here." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "And he left it to you outright, no conditions?" "His will specified that I should inherit everything, and that I was perfectly capable of managing the property," Victoria confirmed. "He taught me bookkeeping when I was young, and we corresponded regularly about ranch operations. I may not know cattle the way you do, but I understand business." "Which is half the battle," Ethan said. "Maybe more than half. Plenty of cowboys know cows, but cannot keep accounts to save their lives." He drummed his fingers on the table, clearly thinking through something. "You need a witness to sign as your equal, correct? Someone willing to verify that you are entering this contract of your own free will and that you understand the obligations?" "That is what Henderson said, yes, but he made it clear he expected that witness to be a husband who would naturally assume control of the property." Victoria could not keep the bitterness from her voice. I suspect even if I found a male business partner, the bank would find ways to transfer actual ownership to him rather than maintaining my autonomy. Probably, Ethan agreed bluntly. Henderson is not a bad sort, but he is conventional as they come. He would assume any man involved deserved the real authority. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. But what if the witness made it clear he was just that, a witness, with no claim to your property or your decisions? The law requires a male signature, but it does not actually require that man to have any ownership stake. Does it? Victoria's heart began to beat faster as she understood what he was suggesting. You are saying someone could witness the contract without becoming my partner or having any legal claim to the ranch? Exactly, Ethan said. I am saying I could witness it. I could go to Henderson, sign whatever papers he needs, and make it crystal clear that I'm simply verifying your competence and your right to inherit. Nothing more. The property stays entirely yours. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Victoria could only stare at him for a long moment. Why would you do that? You do not even know me. For all you know, I will run the ranch into the ground within 6 months. Maybe, Ethan said with a shrug. But that would be your right as the owner. And I knew your uncle. If Bernard Thompson thought you could handle the Twin Creek, then I am inclined to trust his judgment. His expression grew more serious. Besides, this law is wrong. If I can help someone get around unjust rules without breaking them, well, that sits fine with my conscience. Victoria wanted to accept immediately, but years of caution made her hesitate. What would you want in return? There must be something. Nothing, Ethan said firmly. Then he paused, reconsidering. All right, that is not quite true. If you manage to make a success of the Twin Creek, maybe you remember that a neighbor helped you out when you needed it. If my cattle get loose onto your land, you let me know instead of shooting them. If I need to borrow a piece of equipment you have and I do not, you rent it to me at a fair price. Normal neighbor things. It seemed too good to be true, which meant Victoria's instinct was to search for the hidden trap. But Ethan Marsh's green eyes held steady under her scrutiny, and she found herself wanting to believe in his sincerity. When could you go to the bank? Right now, Ethan said promptly. Like I said, I am already in town. Might as well make the trip count for something important. They walked back to the bank together, Victoria's mind whirling with a mixture of hope and disbelief. The morning heat had intensified, turning Fort Bowie into an oven, but she barely noticed the temperature. Ethan's long stride naturally accommodated hers without making her feel rushed. And when they reached the bank's entrance, he held the door open with an old-fashioned courtesy that felt genuine rather than performative. Henderson looked up from his desk with surprise when they entered, his gaze moving from Victoria to Ethan with obvious confusion. Marsh, I did not expect to see you again today. Is there a problem with your equipment order? No problem with that, Ethan said easily. But I am here about Miss Thompson's situation. She tells me you need a male witness to validate her property contract. The bank manager's confusion deepened. Yes, that is correct, but I do not understand. I am volunteering, Ethan said simply. I will witness Miss Thompson's contract as her equal, confirming that she understands the obligations and is entering the agreement of her own free will. That satisfies the legal requirement, does it not? Henderson blinked several times, clearly thrown by this development. Well, yes, technically, but Mr. Marsh, surely you understand that such an arrangement typically implies a business partnership or at minimum a significant personal relationship. You and Miss Thompson are strangers. We are neighbors, Ethan corrected. Or we will be once you stop putting obstacles in the way of her rightful inheritance. The law says she needs a male witness. I am a male witness. What is the problem? There is no problem exactly, Henderson said slowly, but his tone suggested he was searching for one. It is simply irregular. People might talk. They might assume that you and Miss Thompson have an understanding. Then people can assume whatever they want, Ethan said with a shrug. I am not in the habit of making my decisions based on gossip. Now, do you have the papers for Miss Thompson to sign? Or do I need to go fetch a lawyer to explain to you what your own regulations actually require? The veiled threat, delivered in Ethan's pleasant drawl, had its intended effect. Henderson's face flushed, but he pulled out a sheaf of documents from his desk drawer. Very well, if you are both certain about this arrangement, I can process the contract, but I must insist on clarity. Mr. Marsh, you are witnessing this document as a neutral third party with no financial stake in the property. Is that correct? Completely correct, Ethan confirmed. The Twin Creek Ranch belongs entirely to Miss Thompson. I am simply fulfilling the legal requirement for a witness. Henderson looked to Victoria. And you, Miss Thompson, you understand that you are assuming full responsibility for this property, including all debts, obligations, and liabilities? I understand, Victoria said firmly, her voice not wavering despite the way her hands shook as she reached for the pen Henderson offered, and I accept those responsibilities gladly. The actual signing took less than 10 minutes, though each moment felt stretched and significant. Victoria's signature on the deed felt like claiming her future, while Ethan's witness mark beside it felt like a gift from a stranger who had no reason to help her beyond simple human decency. When Henderson finally stamped the documents with his official seal and pushed them across the desk, Victoria had to resist the urge to snatch them up and run before he could change his mind. Congratulations, Miss Thompson, Henderson said, his tone making it clear he thought she was making a terrible mistake. The Twin Creek Ranch is legally yours. The bank accounts associated with the property will be accessible to you as of this afternoon. If you need any assistance managing the finances, I would be happy to provide guidance. That will not be necessary, Victoria said, tucking the precious deed into her bag with careful reverence, but I appreciate the offer. Outside the bank, the midday sun hit like a physical force, and Victoria felt slightly dizzy with the combined effects of heat, relief, and residual shock. I do not know how to thank you, she said to Ethan, meaning it utterly. You just gave me back my future. You always had your future, Ethan said. I just helped clear away some stupid obstacles. He glanced up at the merciless sun, then back at her. Have you eaten? You look a little pale, and I am guessing you have been too worried to have breakfast. Let me buy you lunch to celebrate your new status as a property owner. Victoria realized he was right about the food. Her stomach empty despite the coffee she had nursed that morning. Lunch would be wonderful, but I should be buying since you just did me an enormous favor. Tell you what, Ethan said. You buy next time, once you have been out to your ranch and gotten settled. For today, let me treat. There is a decent place just down the street that does not try to pass off shoe leather as steak. They ended up in a small restaurant with whitewashed walls and mismatched furniture that somehow felt more welcoming than the hotel's formal dining room. Ethan ordered for both of them beef stew and cornbread that arrived in generous portions, and Victoria discovered she was ravenously hungry once the food appeared. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Ethan spoke again. So what is your plan? Head out to the ranch today? Tomorrow morning, I think, Victoria said. I need to arrange for transportation and supplies. Henderson mentioned that Uncle Bernard's foreman stayed on after his death, maintaining the property while the will went through probate. A man named Samuel Carson. Do you know him? Sam? Sure, good man. Been working the Twin Creek for probably 15 years. He will be glad to see you, I expect. He was worried the property might get sold off to some investor who would fire the whole crew. Ethan paused. You will need a wagon for your things. I could arrange that for you, introduce you to the stable owner who will give you a fair price. You have already done so much, Victoria protested, but Ethan waved off her concern. It is a small town. Introductions are just being neighborly, and if I vouch for you, people will be more likely to deal fairly rather than inflating prices for someone they think is an ignorant Easterner. He grinned suddenly. No offense. None taken, since it is entirely accurate, Victoria admitted. I am an ignorant Easterner, at least when it comes to the Arizona territory. I need all the help I can get, and I'm grateful for your willingness to provide it. Then let me do this properly, Ethan said. Tomorrow morning I will come by your hotel with a wagon. We will load your things, and I will ride out to the Twin Creek with you, introduce you to Sam and the crew. It is only about 12 miles, so we will be there by noon if we leave at first light. That way you do not have to navigate alone, and the hands will see right away that you have local support. The offer was generous to the point of suspicious, and Victoria had to ask the question that had been nagging at her since his initial offer at the bank. Why are you doing all of this? And please do not say it is just being neighborly. This goes beyond common courtesy." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice carried old pain. "I told you my mother ran our ranch. What I did not mention is how hard people made it for her. Suppliers would not deal with her directly. Buyers assumed she did not understand cattle prices and tried to cheat her. Other ranchers treated her like she was playing at ranching, like it was a hobby she would give up once she realized how hard the work was." He met Victoria's eyes. She persevered, but it wore her down, made everything twice as hard as it needed to be. I watched her fight those battles alone, and I swore that if I ever had the chance to make things easier for someone else in that situation, I would take it. The honesty in his words resonated through Victoria's chest. "Your mother would be proud of you." "I hope so," Ethan said softly. Then he shook off the melancholy and smiled. "Besides, I meant what I said about your uncle. Bernard Thompson was decent to me when I was first getting established. Gave me advice, let me borrow equipment, never made me feel like an ignorant kid. Helping his niece feels like repaying a debt." They finished lunch talking about the Twin Creek Ranch, Ethan sharing details about the property that Uncle Bernard's letters had never covered. The main house needed some repairs, but it was structurally sound. The herd was healthy, about 300 head of cattle that would be ready for market in the fall. The grazing land was some of the best in the area, with several natural springs that kept the grass green even through the worst of the summer heat. "Sam Carson runs a tight operation," Ethan said, "but he will appreciate having an owner who understands the business side of things. Bernard was good at that, but toward the end, he was more focused on the cattle and let some of the financial details slip. You could probably increase profits just by tightening up the bookkeeping." "That would give me something productive to contribute while I learn the ranching aspects," Victoria said, her mind already turning over possibilities. "Uncle Bernard always said the numbers tell the story if you know how to read them." "Smart man," Ethan agreed. "And speaking of numbers, you should probably know that beef prices are decent right now, but expected to drop this fall. If you are planning to sell any cattle, sooner might be better than later." They talked through the afternoon, Victoria asking questions and Ethan answering with a patience that never felt condescending. He explained the basics of cattle ranching, the seasonal rhythms of the work, the challenges of the Arizona climate. He talked about the complicated relationship between ranchers and the nearby Apache reservation, the ongoing tensions with Mexican cattle smugglers crossing the border, the impact of the railroad expansion on regional commerce. It was full dark by the time they finally left the restaurant, Fort Bowie's streets now lit by lanterns hanging outside businesses and homes. The temperature had dropped with the sunset. The desert night actually cool after the brutal daytime heat. Ethan walked Victoria back to her hotel, their pace slow and unhurried. "Thank you for today," Victoria said when they reached the hotel entrance, "for everything. The contract witnessing, the advice, the company. You turned what could have been a disaster into something hopeful." "My pleasure," Ethan said, and the warmth in his voice suggested he meant it. "I will be here at dawn tomorrow with the wagon. Pack light if you can, but do not worry too much about it. We can always make another supply run if you forget something." Victoria watched him walk away into the darkness, his tall figure eventually disappearing around a corner. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the small flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way his green eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet strength in his hands, the genuine kindness that seemed as natural to him as breathing. She pushed the feeling aside as she climbed the stairs to her room. Romance was not what she needed right now. She needed to focus on establishing herself as a ranch owner, on proving to Fort Bowie and herself that she could succeed on her own terms. Ethan Marsh was being helpful, nothing more, and reading anything deeper into his actions would be foolish. Still, as she prepared for bed, Victoria could not help but replay their conversations, the easy way they had talked, the feeling of being understood rather than patronized. She fell asleep thinking about green eyes and kind smiles, about a cowboy who signed papers as her equal without asking for anything in return, about the possibility that the Arizona territory might offer more than just her uncle's ranch. True to his word, Ethan appeared at her hotel just as the first light of dawn was painting the eastern sky shades of pink and gold. He drove a sturdy wagon pulled by two calm horses, and he helped Victoria load her trunks with efficient competence. Her possessions looked pitifully small in the wagon bed, 3 trunks and 2 carpet bags representing the entirety of what she had brought from Pennsylvania. "Travel light, live light," Ethan said when he noticed her frowning at the meager load. "You can always acquire more things. Starting fresh has advantages." They left Fort Bowie as the town was waking up, passing early risers who stared with frank curiosity at the sight of the town's newest female property owner riding beside Ethan Marsh. Victoria kept her chin up and her expression confident, refusing to show any of the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. She was doing nothing wrong, nothing scandalous. She was simply accepting a neighbor's help in reaching her property. The road south from Fort Bowie was little more than a dirt track worn smooth by wagon wheels and horse hooves. On either side stretched the peculiar beauty of the Arizona desert, a landscape Victoria was still learning to appreciate. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels on the rocky slopes, their arms reaching toward the brightening sky. Mesquite and creosote bushes dotted the valley floor, and in the distance mountains rose in layered shades of purple and blue. "It must seem strange compared to Pennsylvania," Ethan said, guiding the horses with relaxed confidence. "I visited Philadelphia once when I was younger. All those trees and green everywhere. I felt like I was drowning in vegetation." Victoria laughed. "And I feel like I am drowning in empty space. Where I come from, you are never more than a few minutes from the next town. Here it seems like the land goes on forever." "It does," Ethan agreed. "That is part of the appeal for me. Room to breathe, room to think. But it can be lonely if you're not used to it. Make sure you get into town regularly, maintain connections. Isolation is dangerous out here, physically and mentally." They talked as the wagon rolled along, covering the miles with stories and conversation that made the journey pass quickly. Ethan told her about learning to work cattle as a boy, about the year he spent in Texas studying different ranching techniques, about his plans to expand his operation if he could acquire more grazing rights. Victoria shared stories about her uncle, about growing up in a household where her father saw education as wasted on daughters, about the correspondence school courses she had taken in secret to learn bookkeeping and business management. "Your father sounds charming," Ethan said dryly when she described her parents' reaction to her announcement that she was traveling west to claim her inheritance. "He told me I was being hysterical and inappropriate," Victoria said. "He wanted me to sign the property over to my cousin Robert, who would then manage it and presumably send me some token income while keeping the real profits for himself. When I refused, he said I was no longer welcome in his home." "His loss," Ethan said firmly, "though I am sorry you had to make that choice." "I am not," Victoria said, surprised to realize it was true. It clarified things. "I know now that I cannot rely on my family for support, which means I need to build my own support system. It is frightening, but also liberating." The Twin Creek Ranch appeared in the distance around mid-morning, announced by a wooden sign hanging from a weathered crossbeam. The property was situated in a valley between 2 low ridges, with the Promise Creek running through the center of the grazing land. Victoria could see cattle scattered across the grassland, brown and white shapes moving slowly in the already warm air. The main house was a long, low structure built from adobe and timber, with a covered porch running along the front. Nearby stood a barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a collection of smaller outbuildings for equipment and supplies. Everything looked well-maintained but worn, showing years of hard use without quite tipping over into disrepair. 3 men emerged from the barn as the wagon approached, their postures cautious until one of them recognized Ethan. "Marsh, what brings you out here?" "Brought you your new owner," Ethan said cheerfully, pulling the wagon to a stop. "Gentlemen, meet Miss Victoria Thompson, Bernard's niece, and the rightful heir to the Twin Creek Ranch." The oldest of the 3 men stepped forward, a weathered individual probably in his 50s with silver streaking his dark hair. "Miss Thompson, I am Samuel Carson Foreman. Your uncle was a good man, and I am sorry for your loss." He gestured to his companions. This is Tom Wheeler and Jack Saunders, two of our regular hands." Victoria climbed down from the wagon, grateful when her legs held steady despite hours of jostling. "Mr. Carson, I'm glad to finally meet you. Your reports during the probate period were very thorough. And please, call me Victoria if you are comfortable with that. We are going to be working together." Something in Sam Carson's weathered face relaxed. "Victoria it is then. You can call me Sam, everyone does." He glanced at Ethan. Marsh witnessing her contract caused quite the stir in town. Henderson sent word out yesterday that people were talking. "People always talk," Ethan said with a shrug. "Usually because they do not have enough real work to keep them occupied. Victoria here is the legitimate owner, properly documented and legally witnessed. Anyone who has a problem with that can bring it up with me." Sam's eyes sharpened with interest as he looked between them. "Like that, is it?" "It is not like anything," Victoria said quickly, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Marsh was kind enough to help me navigate some legal requirements. We are neighbors, nothing more." "Neighbors who help each other out," Ethan agreed, his tone easy. "Speaking of which, I should probably head back. I have been away from my own place since yesterday, and my hands will be wondering if I decided to run off to California." He turned to Victoria. "You will be all right here?" "I will be fine," Victoria said, meaning it. "Thank you for everything, Ethan. I will not forget your kindness." "Not kindness, just being reasonable," he said. "I will check back in a few days, make sure you are settling in properly, and if you need anything before then, send word. The Double M is only about 10 miles northwest of here." Victoria watched him drive away, feeling oddly bereft despite being surrounded by her new employees. Sam Carson tactfully cleared his throat, drawing her attention back to the immediate situation. "Let us show you around," he said. "Your uncle's personal effects are still in the main house. We did not feel right disturbing them without your permission. And then we can go over the herd counts, the finances, whatever you want to review." The tour took most of the afternoon. The Twin Creek Ranch was larger and more complex than Victoria had imagined, with systems and routines that had been refined over years of operation. Sam explained everything with patient detail, answering her questions without making her feel ignorant. By sunset, Victoria's head was swimming with information about cattle rotation patterns, grazing allotments, water rights, and a dozen other aspects of ranch management she had never considered. Uncle Bernard's bedroom in the main house made her throat tight with grief. His belongings were still scattered around the space, books on the nightstand, boots by the door, as if he might walk in at any moment. Sam had quietly left her alone to sort through her uncle's possessions, and Victoria found herself sitting on the bed, holding one of Bernard's journals and crying for the first time since receiving news of his death. The journal was full of notes about the ranch, but also personal observations, including several passages about Victoria herself. "Received a letter from my niece today," one entry read. "The girl has a head for numbers that puts most men to shame. What a waste that her father refuses to see it. If I were younger, I would bring her out here myself, let her learn the business properly. She would be magnificent given half a chance." Reading her uncle's faith in her capabilities strengthened Victoria's resolve. She would make the Twin Creek Ranch succeed, not just for herself, but as a tribute to the man who had believed in her when her own father had not. She wiped her tears, returned the journal to its place, and went to join Sam for dinner in the main house kitchen. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and learning. Victoria threw herself into understanding every aspect of the ranch operation, riding out with Sam and the hands to observe the cattle, studying the account books until she could track every expense and income stream, making lists of improvements and efficiencies she wanted to implement. The work was exhausting but deeply satisfying in a way her life in Pennsylvania had never been. The ranch hands were initially wary of her, unsure how to treat a female owner, but Victoria's willingness to learn and her refusal to demand special treatment gradually won them over. She did not try to pretend she knew things she did not, but she also made clear that she expected to be taken seriously as the owner. When one of the hands made a disparaging comment about women ranchers, Sam fired him on the spot before Victoria could even respond, making it clear that disrespect would not be tolerated. Ethan stopped by as promised after a few days, ostensibly to check on her progress, but really, Victoria suspected, to make sure none of the hands were giving her trouble. They sat on the ranch house porch in the evening cool, drinking coffee and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire. "You look tired," Ethan observed. "Good tired, though, satisfied tired." "I feel like I have learned more in 2 weeks than I did in 2 years back east," Victoria admitted. "Everything is new and challenging, but I love it. I wake up excited to start the day, which is not something I could say about my old life." "That is how you know you are where you are supposed to be," Ethan said, "when the work feels like living instead of like endurance." He paused. "Sam says you have been going through the account books, finding places where Bernard was losing money." "Small things mostly," Victoria said. "He was paying too much for feed supplements because he was loyal to a supplier who had been raising prices gradually over several years, and there was some confusion in the contract with the buyer who handles his fall cattle sales. We were giving them a discount that was supposed to be temporary but had become permanent. Fixing those two things alone should increase annual profits by nearly 10%. See, this is why ranchers need good business managers," Ethan said. "We know cows, but we are not always great with contracts and negotiations. Have you thought about offering your services to other ranches once you get the Twin Creek fully stabilized?" The idea startled Victoria. "Do you think people would hire me?" "I would," Ethan said promptly. "And if I vouch for you, others will at least give you a chance. There is money to be made in consulting, and it would give you another income stream beyond cattle sales. Diversification is never a bad idea." They talked into the night, conversation ranging from business strategies to personal histories to observations about the strange, beautiful landscape of the Arizona Territory. Victoria found herself relaxing around Ethan in a way she rarely did with anyone, his presence comfortable and undemanding. When he finally left, riding back toward his own ranch under a sky ablaze with stars, Victoria sat on the porch for a long time, thinking about green eyes and easy smiles and the way her heart had started beating faster whenever she heard horse hooves approaching, hoping they might belong to him. She was being foolish, she told herself. Ethan Marsh was a kind neighbor, nothing more. He had helped her because it was the right thing to do, and she should not read romance into simple human decency. Besides, she had a ranch to run, a future to build. She could not afford distractions. But her dreams that night were full of a tall cowboy with patient hands and a voice like warm honey, and she woke with a smile on her face that had nothing to do with cattle or contracts. The trouble started in August, when a neighboring rancher named Cyrus Bradford rode onto Twin Creek property with 3 of his hands and demanded to speak with the owner. Victoria was in the main house reviewing supply orders when Sam came to fetch her, his expression tense. "Bradford is here, and he is in a mood," Sam said quietly. "Be careful. He is the type who thinks women should not own property, and he has been making noise in town about the Twin Creek going to waste under female management." Victoria straightened her shoulders and walked out to meet Bradford, determined not to show the nervousness churning in her stomach. The man waiting by the barn was in his 60s, heavy-set and red-faced, with the aggressive posture of someone used to intimidating others into compliance. "You Thompson?" he barked when Victoria approached. "I am Victoria Thompson, owner of the Twin Creek Ranch," she said, keeping her voice level. "How can I help you, Mr. Bradford?" "You can help me by selling this place to someone who knows how to run it," Bradford said bluntly. "Your uncle and I had an understanding. He was going to sell me water rights to your Southern Springs. Now he is dead, and you are here playing at ranching, and I need those rights." "I am not playing at anything," Victoria said, her temper stirring, "and I have reviewed all of Uncle Bernard's papers. There is no agreement regarding water rights, formal or informal." "We had a gentleman's agreement," Bradford insisted. "Bernard promised me access to those springs for my cattle. The drought this summer has dried up 2 of my water sources. I need those springs, or I will lose cattle." "I sympathize with your situation," Victoria said, though Bradford's aggressive attitude made sympathy difficult. "But without a formal contract, I cannot simply give away access to ranch resources. If you want to negotiate for water rights, we can discuss terms and draw up a proper agreement." Bradford's face darkened. "Terms? Bernard would have just let me use the water, neighbor to neighbor. But you are some Eastern female who does not understand how things work out here. You are going to make enemies, Miss Thompson, and that is a dangerous thing in the Arizona Territory." The threat, barely veiled, made Victoria's blood run cold, but she refused to let Bradford see her fear. "If you are threatening me, Mr. Bradford, I will have to ask you to leave my property. And if you continue, I will report your behavior to the sheriff." "Report whatever you want," Bradford said with a nasty smile. "We will see how long you last out here without any friends." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his hands following, leaving Victoria shaking with a mixture of anger and genuine fear. Sam appeared at her elbow. That was well handled, but he meant what he said. Bradford has influence in the region, and he is not above causing trouble for people who cross him. "What kind of trouble?" Victoria asked. He has run smaller ranchers out of business by undercutting their prices, buying up their grazing rights, making it impossible for them to get their cattle to market," Sam explained. "He fancies himself a cattle baron, and he does not like competition or defiance." Victoria thought about the situation for a moment. "The southern springs he mentioned, how critical are they to our operation?" "Not very," Sam admitted. "We have 3 other reliable water sources, and the southern springs are at the far edge of our property. Bernard mostly kept them to prevent Bradford from expanding his grazing land into that area. It was a territorial boundary issue more than a practical resource." "And how desperate is Bradford's situation really?" Victoria asked. Sam shrugged. "Hard to say. He might be exaggerating to pressure you. But it is true that this summer has been drier than usual. Water is always valuable in the territory." Victoria made a decision. "Send word to Bradford that I'm willing to negotiate a temporary water-sharing agreement for his cattle, with clear terms and a contract that protects both parties. He can access the southern springs through the end of the year, giving him time to develop his own water sources. In exchange, he pays a modest fee and agrees to maintain the area, preventing erosion and overgrazing." "You are being generous to a man who just threatened you," Sam observed. "I am being strategic," Victoria corrected. "If I can turn Bradford from an enemy into a neutral party or even an ally by sacrificing a resource I do not critically need, that is good business. And having a formal contract means he cannot later claim I owe him more than we agreed upon." Sam nodded slowly. "Your uncle would have approved. He always said the best victories were the ones where everyone walked away feeling like they won something." The negotiation with Bradford took several days and required Victoria to hold firm on several points, but eventually they reached an agreement. Bradford got his water access, Victoria got a fee that more than paid for the inconvenience, and both parties signed a contract that clearly specified the temporary nature of the arrangement. Bradford was not exactly friendly afterward, but the open hostility disappeared, replaced by grudging respect. Ethan, when he heard about the situation, was impressed. "You handled that better than most men would have," he said. They were riding together along the boundary between their properties, ostensibly to check for fence damage, but really just enjoying each other's company. Bradford is used to intimidating people into giving him what he wants. Standing up to him while still finding a compromise took courage and intelligence. "I was terrified," Victoria admitted. "When he made that threat, I genuinely thought he might try to burn my barn or poison my cattle or something equally horrible." "He might have, if you had just refused him outright," Ethan said. "But you gave him a path to get what he needed without either of you losing face. That is skilled negotiation." He paused. "Though you should know that word of how you handled Bradford is spreading. Other ranchers are taking notice. Some of them are impressed, others are annoyed that you made them look bad by comparison." "I cannot win," Victoria said with frustration. "If I am too accommodating, people will think I am weak and try to take advantage. If I am too firm, they will say I am difficult and unfeminine. There is no middle ground that satisfies everyone. So stop trying to satisfy everyone, Ethan said simply. Satisfy yourself. Run your ranch the way you think is right. Treat people fairly and let the critics complain. Their opinions do not pay your bills or feed your cattle." They stopped to rest the horses by a small creek, the water sparkling in the afternoon sun. Ethan dismounted and helped Victoria down, his hands steadying her waist for a moment longer than strictly necessary. She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the way his green eyes had darkened with something that looked like longing. "Victoria," he said softly, and there was a question in the way he said her name. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes?" "I know this is poor timing. You are still getting established, and I do not want to complicate your life, but I cannot stop thinking about you. When I wake up, you are my first thought. When I go to sleep, I am wondering if you are safe, if you are happy, if you ever think about me the way I think about you." "I do," Victoria whispered. "I think about you constantly, but I am terrified, Ethan, terrified that if this goes wrong, I will lose not just someone I care about, but the one ally I have in this territory. Terrified that people will say you are just trying to get control of my ranch. Terrified that I'm not ready for this, that I will somehow ruin everything." "You are not going to ruin anything," Ethan said, reaching up to cup her cheek with one calloused hand. "And I do not want your ranch. I want you, your intelligence, your courage, your determination. The way you bite your lip when you are thinking through a problem. The way you laugh when something genuinely delights you. I want all of it, Victoria. If you will have me." She should have been cautious. She should have considered the implications, the potential complications. Instead, Victoria rose onto her toes and kissed him, pouring weeks of longing into the contact. Ethan responded immediately, his arms coming around her, pulling her close as the kiss deepened into something that made her head spin and her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" "It is a yes to figuring this out together," Victoria said. "Slowly, carefully, because I do not want to lose you and I do not want to give anyone ammunition to use against either of us. But yes, Ethan, I want to see where this goes." They sat by the creek for hours talking about hopes and fears and possibilities. Ethan shared his dream of building the Double M into one of the most successful ranches in the territory, not through aggressive expansion like Bradford, but through quality stock and ethical management. Victoria talked about her vision for the Twin Creek, her plans to modernize operations while maintaining the community her uncle had built with his employees. "We could help each other," Ethan said thoughtfully. "Share resources, coordinate on cattle sales to get better prices, maybe even combine some operations where it makes sense. 2 ranches working together could accomplish more than 2 ranches competing." "A partnership," Victoria said, "but one where we maintain separate ownership and identities. I will not lose the Twin Creek after fighting so hard to keep it." "I would never ask you to," Ethan assured her. "Your ranch is yours just like mine is mine, but partnerships can exist without ownership changes. That is what contracts are for." They rode back to the Twin Creek together as the sun set, and Ethan stayed for dinner, charming Sam and the ranch hands with stories about cattle drives and his disastrous first attempt at bronco riding. Victoria watched him interact with her employees, noting how naturally he commanded respect without demanding it, how his easy humor put people at ease while his underlying competence inspired confidence. When he finally left, riding off into the darkness toward his own ranch, Victoria stood on the porch and admitted to herself what she had been avoiding acknowledging for weeks. She was falling in love with Ethan Marsh, had probably started falling the moment he offered to witness her contract without asking for anything in return. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The relationship developed slowly over the following months, constrained by the demands of ranch work and the need to avoid fueling gossip. Ethan visited the Twin Creek regularly, but always with legitimate business reasons. They reviewed each other's account books, coordinated cattle sales, shared information about market prices and buyer reliability. To outside observers, they were simply neighbors engaged in mutually beneficial business cooperation. In private moments, stolen between chores and obligations, they learned each other's depths. Ethan talked about losing his mother, about the weight of running a ranch alone, about his fear that he would never find someone who understood the demands of this life. Victoria shared her complicated feelings about her family, her grief for Uncle Bernard, her terror that she would fail and prove all her father's dismissive predictions correct. "You are not going to fail," Ethan said one evening, as they sat together watching the stars emerge over the desert. You are too stubborn and too talented. The Twin Creek is already running better than it was under your uncle, and he was a good rancher. You have a gift for this, Victoria. Or I am simply applying basic business principles that men ignore because they think ranching is about machismo rather than management, Victoria said dryly. Ethan laughed. There is that, too. You're definitely making the rest of us look bad. I have had 2 other ranchers ask if you would be willing to review their books for a fee. Really? Victoria was surprised and pleased. Who? Martin Hayes and John Whitmore both have decent operations but are struggling with profits. They heard about your work with the Twin Creek and figured you might spot what they are missing. Victoria considered the opportunity. Extra income would be valuable, but more importantly, it would establish her as a legitimate business expert rather than simply a lucky heiress. I will do it. If you think they will actually take advice from a woman, they will if they have sense, Ethan said. And if they do not, that is their loss and someone else's gain. The consulting work proved both profitable and reputation-enhancing. Victoria discovered that she had a talent for analyzing ranch operations and identifying inefficiencies, and her suggestions consistently resulted in improved margins for her clients. By fall, she had a waiting list of ranchers seeking her services, and the extra income allowed her to make improvements to the Twin Creek she had thought would take years to afford. The ranch prospered under her management. The fall cattle sale brought record profits, partly because of favorable market conditions, but mostly because Victoria had negotiated directly with buyers, refusing to accept the first offer and playing multiple interested parties against each other until she secured an excellent price. Sam was impressed. The ranch hands were delighted with their bonuses, and even the skeptical old-timers in Fort Bowie had to admit that Miss Thompson might actually know what she was doing. Ethan took her to a dance in town to celebrate, the social event of the fall season. Victoria wore her best dress, deep blue silk that had been her mother's before that woman had quietly sent it west as a peace offering without her husband's knowledge. The gesture had made Victoria cry, a reminder that some family connections persisted even across vast distances and bitter disagreements. The dance was held in Fort Bowie's largest building, a converted warehouse that had been decorated with lanterns and bunting for the occasion. Half the territory seemed to be in attendance, ranchers and townspeople and cavalry officers from the fort mixing in a rare moment of unified celebration. Victoria was nervous walking in on Ethan's arm, aware that their relationship was about to become public knowledge, but his steady presence beside her provided courage. They danced, Ethan proving surprisingly graceful for a man who spent most of his time on horseback. He held her properly, maintaining the appropriate distance for propriety's sake, but his eyes promised things that made Victoria's breath catch. Between dances, they socialized with other guests, and Victoria was gratified to note that most people treated her with respect, acknowledging her success with the Twin Creek. Cyrus Bradford was there with his family, and he actually approached Victoria to shake her hand. Miss Thompson, I wanted to thank you again for the water agreement. We developed our own well last month, so we will not need to renew the contract, but you saved my operation this summer. I appreciate that. I am glad we could find a solution that worked for both of us, Victoria said diplomatically, and Bradford nodded before moving on. Look at you, making allies out of former enemies, Ethan murmured in her ear. You are going to own this territory before long. I just want to run my ranch in peace, Victoria said, but she was smiling. The evening was magical, one of those perfect moments where everything aligned. Victoria felt beautiful, successful, happy. She was dancing with a man she loved, surrounded by a community that was beginning to accept her. The Arizona territory, which had seemed so foreign and hostile 6 months ago, was starting to feel like home. Late in the evening, Ethan led her outside for air, the warehouse having grown warm and stuffy with so many bodies. They walked a little distance from the building, far enough that the noise of the party faded to a pleasant murmur. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Victoria, Ethan said, and there was something in his voice that made her turn to face him fully. He took her hands, his expression serious. I know we agreed to take things slowly, and I know there are practical considerations to think about, but I need to say this before I lose my courage. I love you. I am completely, irrevocably in love with you. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and the thought of spending the rest of my life without you makes me miserable. So I am asking Victoria Thompson, will you marry me? Her heart felt too big for her chest, joy and fear warring within her. What about the ranch? I cannot give up the Twin Creek, Ethan. I fought too hard for it. I am not asking you to give up anything, Ethan said. We would keep the ranches separate, both in our own names. You would continue to run the Twin Creek exactly as you have been. The only difference would be that we would face everything together instead of separately. Your success, your struggles, they would be ours. Just like mine would be ours, partners in every way. People will say I only married you to secure my position, Victoria said, voicing one of her deepest fears. People will say whatever they want regardless of what we do, Ethan countered. We could stay just business partners and they would still gossip. At least this way, we would be happy while they talk. He was right, Victoria realized. There was no path forward that would silence all criticism. She could live her life trying to prove herself to people who were determined to think the worst, or she could choose happiness and let the critics be damned. When she thought about it that way, the choice was obvious. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear. Yes, Ethan Marsh, I will marry you. I love you completely, and I want to build a life with you, ranches and all. Ethan's whoop of joy startled a group of cavalry officers smoking nearby, but he did not care. He swept Victoria into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down to kiss her thoroughly, propriety forgotten in the rush of happiness. They told no one that night, wanting to keep the engagement private for a few more hours. But word spread quickly through Fort Bowie the next day, and reactions were mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for them, including Sam Carson, who said gruffly that he had seen it coming for months, and it was about time they made it official. Others were skeptical or disapproving, predicting that the marriage would end with Ethan controlling both ranches and Victoria reduced to a decorative wife. Let them predict whatever they want, Ethan said when Victoria shared some of the nastier gossip. We will prove them wrong by living our lives exactly as we plan. They were married in October, in a small ceremony at the Twin Creek Ranch, with Sam serving as witness alongside several ranch hands from both properties. Victoria wore a simple cream-colored dress and carried wildflowers that Ethan had spent a morning gathering from the desert. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony on the ranch house porch, the mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. Instead of traditional vows, they spoke promises they had written themselves. Ethan promised to respect Victoria's autonomy, to support her decisions, to treat her always as an equal partner. Victoria promised to trust Ethan with her vulnerabilities, to share both triumphs and struggles, to build a future that honored both of their dreams. The legal arrangements had been drawn up carefully by the best lawyer in Tucson. The Twin Creek remained entirely in Victoria's name, with Ethan having no ownership claim. The Double M remained entirely in Ethan's name, with Victoria having no ownership claim. They established a joint household account for shared expenses, but maintained separate business accounts for their individual ranch operations. It was unconventional, but it protected both parties while allowing them to genuinely function as equal partners. Their wedding night was spent at the Twin Creek, in the room that had been Victoria's since she arrived, but now belonged to both of them. Ethan was gentle and patient, taking time to learn what brought Victoria pleasure, making her feel cherished rather than simply possessed. When they finally came together fully, it felt like the culmination of months of emotional intimacy, their physical union deepening connection that was already profound. Afterward, lying tangled together in sheets damp with sweat and satisfaction, Victoria traced idle patterns on Ethan's chest. I used to think marriage would feel like a cage, she admitted softly. Like I would lose myself in trying to be what a husband expected, but this feels like freedom. Like I am more myself with you than I ever was alone. That is how it should be, Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. You make me better too. more thoughtful, more patient, more ambitious in the right ways. We amplify each other's strengths. Life settled into new rhythms after the marriage. Most nights Ethan stayed at the Twin Creek, but several times a week he rode back to the Double M to oversee operations there. Sometimes Victoria accompanied him, learning about his ranch the way he had learned about hers. They found that their operations complemented each other well, with Ethan's focus on breeding quality stock pairing nicely with Victoria's talent for market analysis and buyer negotiation. The first real test of their partnership came in December, when one of Ethan's hands was seriously injured in an accident with a spooked horse. The man, a young cowboy named Danny Peterson, broke his leg badly enough that the doctor in Fort Bowie was not sure it would heal properly. The injury happened right before Christmas, when Ethan had been planning a trip to Tucson to negotiate new equipment contracts. "I cannot leave now," Ethan said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Danny needs someone to make sure he gets proper care, and we have a dozen things that need attention before the new year. But if I miss this negotiation window, we will lose favorable pricing." "I will go to Tucson," Victoria said immediately. "Give me your specifications and your budget limits. I can negotiate equipment contracts as well as you can, probably better." Ethan looked torn between relief and concern. "Tucson is a 4-day journey, and you would be going alone. I do not like the idea of you traveling that far without protection." "So I will take Tom Wheeler from the Twin Creek and one of your hands as escorts," Victoria said practically. "I am not going to let fear keep me from helping you, Ethan. We are partners. That means stepping up when the other person needs support." The trip to Tucson was exhausting but successful. Victoria negotiated contracts that saved nearly 15% off the expected costs while securing better delivery terms. When she returned to Fort Bowie, triumphant and only moderately dusty, Ethan met her wagon on the road and swept her into his arms despite the interested gazes of their escorts. "You are magnificent," he said between kisses. "Absolutely magnificent." "I am practical," Victoria corrected, "and I am good at math, but I appreciate the compliment." Christmas that year was spent quietly at the Twin Creek, just Victoria and Ethan and a few ranch hands who had nowhere else to go. They roasted a turkey, exchanged modest gifts, sang carols that were more enthusiastic than tuneful. Victoria gave Ethan a leather journal for tracking breeding records embossed with his initials. Ethan gave Victoria a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny engraved horse charm, a reminder of her courage in claiming her inheritance. "To new traditions," Ethan said, raising his glass in a toast. "To building something lasting," Victoria agreed, and they drank to their future. The new year brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. A drought in the spring threatened both ranches, forcing creative water management that tested Victoria's problem-solving skills. A conflict with cattle rustlers operating near the Mexican border required coordination with the cavalry and other local ranchers, with Ethan taking the lead in organizing community defense. Through it all, they supported each other, celebrating successes and weathering setbacks as a true team. In April, Victoria realized she was pregnant. The discovery came as a shock, partly because they had been so focused on ranch operations that the possibility had not seriously crossed her mind. She told Ethan one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, her hands trembling slightly as she shared the news. Ethan's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, shock giving way to wonder, giving way to pure joy. "A baby? We are going to have a baby?" "Apparently mature," Victoria said, still processing her own mixed emotions. "I am terrified, Ethan. How am I supposed to run a ranch while being pregnant? And what happens after the baby comes? I cannot just stop working. The Twin Creek needs me." "The Twin Creek has Sam and a good crew," Ethan said gently, "and you have me. We will figure it out together, Victoria. Maybe you focus more on the business side and less on physical ranch work. Maybe we hire additional help for the months when you need it. There are solutions, we just have to be creative." His calm confidence eased some of Victoria's panic. They talked late into the night, planning for how to manage their ranches and a new baby, what adjustments would be necessary, what resources they might need. By the time they went to bed, Victoria felt less overwhelmed, and more cautiously excited about this unexpected development. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Victoria discovered that being pregnant did not make her incompetent or helpless, despite what some people seem to assume. She continued her consulting work, reviewing account books and advising other ranchers right up until the last few weeks before her due date. She worked with Sam to train one of the younger ranch hands in some management responsibilities, creating more distributed leadership at the Twin Creek. Ethan was alternately protective and admirably willing to treat her as capable. When she wanted to ride out to check on cattle in her 5th month, he worried but did not forbid. When she insisted on traveling to Fort Bowie for a meeting in her 7th month, he came along but let her conduct the negotiation herself. It was the balance Victoria needed, feeling supported without being smothered. Their son was born in October, exactly a year after their wedding, in the bedroom at the Twin Creek with a midwife from town attending. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Victoria genuinely thought she might die, but eventually she held a squalling, red-faced baby who already had his father's dark hair. "He is perfect," Ethan said, tears streaming down his face as he cradled his son for the first time. "Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Victoria." "Thank you." They named him Benjamin, after Ethan's father, with the middle name Bernard to honor Victoria's uncle. Little Benjamin was healthy and loud, demanding attention at all hours and thoroughly disrupting their carefully organized lives. Victoria found motherhood exhausting and frustrating and surprisingly fulfilling. The love she felt for her son both fierce and terrifying in its intensity. Ranch work became more complicated with a baby, but they adapted. Victoria learned to nurse Benjamin while reviewing account books, to nap when he napped so she could function on interrupted sleep. Sam proved surprisingly good with babies, often entertaining Benjamin in the ranch house kitchen while Victoria worked. Ethan split his time between ranches, making sure both operations stayed on track while still being present for his new family. "I feel like I'm failing at everything," Victoria admitted one night when Benjamin was 3 months old and she was running on 4 hours of sleep spread across a week. "The ranches are operating below capacity, my consulting clients are getting annoyed with my delays, and I am a mediocre mother who cannot figure out how to stop the baby from crying." "You are not failing at anything," Ethan said firmly. "You are juggling an impossible amount, and you are doing it better than most people could. Benjamin is healthy and loved. The ranches are profitable. Your clients are patient because they know you deliver results. You need to be kinder to yourself." "I used to be so competent," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "Now I feel like I am constantly scrambling just to keep up." Ethan pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his shoulder. "You are still competent. You are just also human. And being human means sometimes you need help. Let me hire someone to assist with the housework. Let Sam take more leadership at the Twin Creek. Let yourself have space to breathe." They made changes, bringing in a young woman named Maria to help with cooking and cleaning at the Twin Creek. Victoria gradually delegated more ranch management to Sam, trusting him to handle day-to-day operations while she focused on strategic decisions and financial management. It was difficult to let go of control, but Victoria discovered that sharing responsibility did not mean losing authority. The Twin Creek continued to thrive under Sam's capable management, and she was able to spend more time with Benjamin without feeling like she was neglecting her business. By Benjamin's 1st birthday, they had found a sustainable rhythm. Both ranches were prospering. Victoria's consulting practice had expanded to include ranches as far away as New Mexico, and Benjamin was a happy, healthy toddler who loved horses and had clearly inherited his father's easy charm. They celebrated Benjamin's birthday with a gathering at the Twin Creek, inviting friends and neighbors for an afternoon of food and socializing. Victoria watched Ethan playing with their son, tossing him gently in the air while Benjamin shrieked with delight, and felt a contentment she had never imagined possible back when she first arrived in the Arizona Territory as a terrified woman with a voided contract. Sam came to stand beside her, following her gaze. "You have built something good here, Victoria. Your uncle would be proud." "We have built something good," Victoria corrected. "I could not have done any of this without help." Without you keeping the ranch running, without Ethan believing in me, without friends who gave me chances when they could have dismissed me. True enough, Sam agreed, but you had to be willing to accept that help, and you had to prove you deserved the chances. That took courage. As the afternoon wore on, Victoria found herself reflecting on how much had changed in 3 years. She had arrived in Fort Bowie as Miss Victoria Thompson, a disowned daughter with an inheritance she could not claim. Now she was Victoria Marsh, successful rancher, respected business consultant, wife and mother. The Twin Creek Ranch was more profitable than it had ever been under Uncle Bernard. The Double M was expanding, Ethan having recently acquired additional grazing rights that would allow him to increase his herd significantly. More importantly, she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way that felt earned through struggle and perseverance. The life she had built bore no resemblance to the constrained existence her father had envisioned for her, and that fact brought Victoria tremendous satisfaction. That evening, after the guests had left, and Benjamin was asleep in his crib, Victoria and Ethan sat together on the porch in their customary spot. The October air was cool and pleasant, the desert autumn less dramatic than eastern autumns but beautiful in its own subtle way. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. "About how a voided contract turned into the best thing that ever happened to me," Victoria said. "If Henderson had just processed my inheritance without problems, I might never have met you. Or if I had met you, it would have been as established neighbors rather than you helping someone desperate." "I prefer to think we would have found each other regardless," Ethan said. "Some things are meant to be." "Pragmatist," Victoria teased gently. "Since when do you believe in destiny?" "Since I met a stubborn Eastern woman who refused to let bureaucracy destroy her dreams, Winya," Ethan said. "If that is not destiny, I do not know what is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Victoria thought about her father, who had not responded to any of her letters announcing her marriage or Benjamin's birth. The rejection still hurt, but it was a distant hurt now, an old wound rather than a fresh injury. She had built her own family, one based on mutual respect and genuine partnership rather than obligation and control. "I want more," Victoria said suddenly. "More children if we are fortunate. More ranches maybe if the opportunities are right. More years of this, of building something lasting with you." "More is good," Ethan agreed. "I am happy to pursue more of everything with you, Victoria Marsh, whatever adventures come next." The adventures came steadily over the following years. A second child, a daughter they named Clara, was born in 1886. Victoria's consulting practice grew until she was advising ranches across 3 territories. Ethan's breeding program produced cattle that were in high demand throughout the Southwest. Together they acquired a 3rd ranch, a struggling property between their 2 operations that they restructured and revitalized, creating a combined enterprise that made them one of the most successful ranching families in the region. Through it all, they maintained the partnership that had been the foundation of their relationship from the beginning. They made major decisions together, respected each other's expertise, supported each other through challenges. The Twin Creek remained Victoria's, the Double M remained Ethan's, and the new property, which they called the Marsh-Thompson Ranch in recognition of both families, belonged to them jointly. Fort Bowie watched their success with reactions ranging from admiration to envy to grudging respect. Victoria became known as one of the shrewdest business minds in the territory, her advice sought by ranchers and merchants alike. Ethan earned a reputation as a fair employer and innovative rancher, his methods studied and emulated by others. But more than professional success, they built a life full of love and laughter and small domestic pleasures. Benjamin grew into a serious boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Clara was a wild child, fearless and charming, able to wrap her father around her tiny finger with a single smile. When a 3rd child, another son they named Thomas, was born in 1889, their family felt complete. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Victoria with a gift that made her cry. He had tracked down her mother, circumventing her father entirely, and arranged for the woman to visit the ranch. Victoria's mother spent 3 weeks in Arizona, meeting her grandchildren for the first time and seeing the life her daughter had built. "Your father is a fool," Victoria's mother said quietly one evening as they watched the children play. "But I am proud of you, Victoria. You became everything I hoped you would despite all the obstacles in your way." "I had help," Victoria said, thinking of that day in the bank when a stranger had offered to witness her contract. "A lot of help from people who believed in me when they had no reason to." "You earned their belief," her mother insisted. "Never doubt that." The reunion with her mother eased something in Victoria's heart that she had not realized still hurt. They corresponded regularly after that. Long letters sharing news and small details of daily life. It was not the same as having a relationship with her father, but it was something precious nonetheless. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but always underlain with the solid foundation of Victoria and Ethan's partnership. They weathered droughts and market crashes, disease outbreaks among the cattle, and conflicts with competing ranchers. They celebrated their children's milestones: Benjamin's graduation from the agricultural college in New Mexico, Clara's unexpected talent for veterinary medicine, Thomas's gift for working with horses. Through it all, through good times and difficult periods, Victoria and Ethan remained each other's constant support and greatest love. They still sat on the porch most evenings talking about the day's events or simply enjoying comfortable silence. They still made each other laugh, still found joy in small shared moments, still looked at each other with the wonder of people who had found something extraordinary. On their 20th anniversary, surrounded by their children and ranch hands and friends, Victoria stood to make a toast. 20 years ago, I arrived in Arizona territory as a terrified woman whose inheritance had been voided because I had no husband. I thought my life was over, that I had lost everything that mattered. Instead, I met a cowboy who offered to witness my contract as my equal, asking nothing in return but the chance to do something right. That act of generosity changed everything, not because it gave me access to my ranch, but because it introduced me to the man who would become my partner in all things. She turned to Ethan, her eyes bright with emotion. "You could have asked for ownership or control. You could have leveraged my desperation into advantage for yourself. Instead, you treated me as an equal when almost no one else would. You believed in me before I fully believed in myself. You loved me not despite my ambitions, but because of them." Every good thing in my life traces back to that moment in the bank when you decided to help a stranger. So thank you, Ethan Marsh, for witnessing my contract and for witnessing my life. Thank you for 20 years of partnership and love. Thank you for being the man I needed when I did not even know what I needed. There was not a dry eye in the gathering by the time Victoria finished. Ethan stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly while their guests cheered. Later, when the celebration had wound down and they were alone again on their beloved porch, he held her close and whispered against her hair, "Best decision I ever made was walking into that bank and seeing a woman who looked like she was ready to fight the world. I am honored that you let me fight beside you instead of against you." "We make a good team," Victoria said simply. "The very best," Ethan agreed. They sat together under the Arizona stars, hands intertwined. Two people who had found in each other what they had not known to seek. A partnership built on equality, respect, and love. A life constructed from courage and compromise, and the unwavering belief that the right person's support could help you become more than you ever imagined possible. Victoria thought back to that terrified woman in the bank, to the moment when her carefully laid plans had crumbled into dust. She wished she could tell that younger self not to despair, that the voided contract was not an ending but a beginning, that the cowboy offering help was not just solving an immediate problem but offering a future worth more than any inheritance. But she could not go back and offer that reassurance to her younger self. All she could do was live forward, building on the foundation that improbable meeting had created. Building a legacy not just of successful ranches and financial prosperity, but of a partnership that proved love and ambition need not be opposing forces, that two people willing to treat each other as true equals could accomplish extraordinary things together. As the night deepened, and the desert air grew cool. Victoria leaned against Ethan's solid warmth and smiled. Her contract might have been voided all those years ago, but the life she had built in its place was more valuable than any piece of paper could convey. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the person she belonged with, living a story that had begun with a simple act of kindness from a cowboy who saw her as an equal. And that, Victoria reflected as sleep began to claim her, was the best possible outcome anyone could hope for. Not perfection, but rightness. Not ease, but fulfillment. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real life built on genuine partnership and enduring love. The Twin Creek Ranch continued to prosper. The Double M continued to thrive. The Marsh-Thompson enterprise became legendary in the territory. But more than professional success, Victoria and Ethan built a family and a legacy of treating others with fairness and dignity, of believing that success meant lifting others up rather than pushing them down. Their children grew and eventually took over various aspects of the ranch operations, each bringing their own skills and innovations while maintaining the core values their parents had instilled. Benjamin managed the financial and business operations with his mother's analytical mind. Clara revolutionized their veterinary care and breeding programs. Thomas became the best horse trainer in 3 territories, his patience and intuition producing animals sought after throughout the Southwest. Victoria and Ethan gradually stepped back from daily management, transitioning into advisory roles where their experience and wisdom could guide the next generation without stifling their independence. They traveled some, visiting places they had always wanted to see. They spent more time with grandchildren as those arrived, delighting in the continuation of the family they had built. But they always returned to Arizona, to the desert landscape that had witnessed their greatest struggles and sweetest triumphs, to the porch where they had shared countless conversations and comfortable silences, to the land they had worked with their own hands and loved with their whole hearts. On their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren and a community that had come to genuinely respect and care for them both, Victoria raised her glass one final time. To partnerships that transcend legal contracts, to love that treats people as equals, to cowboy witnesses who turn desperation into hope, and to 40 years of building something that will outlast us both. To us, Ethan said simply, his green eyes still bright with the same love that had drawn Victoria in from the very beginning. Always and forever to us. They drank and they celebrated, and they looked around at the life they had built together from that single moment when a contract was voided and a stranger decided to help. It was a life worth celebrating, worth the struggles and sacrifices required to achieve it. A life that proved good things could come from terrible moments if you were brave enough to accept help and wise enough to offer it in return. The sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple. Victoria leaned against Ethan's familiar warmth, her hand in his, and felt complete. The girl who had arrived terrified in Fort Bowie 4 decades ago would scarcely recognize the woman she had become, but Victoria thought she would be proud. Proud of the courage it took to claim her inheritance, proud of the wisdom to accept partnership instead of insisting on complete independence, proud of the love she had built with a man who had seen her as an equal when such vision was rare and precious. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, as he had asked countless times over their decades together. "That I am grateful," Victoria said, "for you, for our family, for this life, for a voided contract that led to everything that mattered." "Then I suppose we should be grateful to Henderson for being such a stickler for regulations," Ethan said with a smile. "I suppose we should," Victoria agreed, and they laughed together. 2 people who had found in each other the partnership that made everything else possible. 2 equals who had witnessed each other's lives and made them infinitely richer in the process. 2 souls who had discovered that love built on respect and mutual support could weather any storm and celebrate any triumph. The celebration continued around them, but Victoria and Ethan remained in their own world, hands clasped, hearts full, grateful beyond measure for the journey that had brought them here. From strangers to witnesses to partners to lovers to soulmates, their story was one worth telling, worth celebrating, worth remembering. And as the stars emerged over the desert they had made their home, Victoria smiled and held tight to the hand of the man who had given her everything by asking nothing except the chance to stand beside her as an equal. It was enough. It was everything. It was the life she had been meant to live, found only because a contract was voided and a cowboy decided to help. Their story was complete, their legacy secure, their love eternal. And in the quiet of that anniversary evening, surrounded by the proof of lives well lived and love freely given, Victoria and Ethan Marsh simply sat together and enjoyed the peace that comes from knowing you built something lasting with exactly the right person. The future stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility, but the foundation would always be that moment in a dusty bank when everything changed because one person decided to treat another as an equal. And that, Victoria knew in her bones, was how every good love story should begin.